What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1724 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Toronto's waterfront BIA. More than just water. Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. Get your butts to Christie Pitts this summer for the best baseball in the city, outside the dome. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. Building Toronto Skyline, a podcast and book from Nick Iones, sponsored by Fusion Corp Construction Management Inc. and Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, returning to Toronto Mic'd, it's Steve Simmons. Welcome back, Steve.
Nice to be here. I see you've had 1,700 and some podcasts.
1724 is your lucky number this time.
I think I'm 4 of them.
Yeah, well, listen, I took notes, so let's do this. I think this is your 4th, is what I think.
That's what I thought in my head coming here.
All right, let me tell you, let's recap the ongoing history of Steve Simmons on Toronto Mic'd. I will say your last visit was 2022, so this was long overdue, almost 3 years ago since you've been here. Did you miss me, Steve?
I miss you all the time.
The feeling is mutual. Okay, so just to recap, because somebody listening is like, I didn't know Steve Simmons was on Toronto Mic'd before, and they can go into the archives and they can hear your first visit, April 2016. That's a long time ago, almost a decade ago. It was episode 170. What a low number that was. Mike, this is the description I wrote at the time, Steve. Mike chats with Toronto Sun columnist Steve Simmons about his years at the Toronto Sun, his relationships with Damian Cox, David Schultz, and James Myrtle. So this is of the time. His thoughts on analytics and hockey, his Phil Kessel story about hot dogs, and how he got Howard Berger fired. And we also talked about what it was like for you being a day oneer at the Fan 590, the Team 1050, and the Score. What an episode, Steve.
I might as well leave now. I can't talk.
Let's revisit all those. That was, you know what? I remember this. So you just told me before we press record, you literally golfed with David Schultz last week, right?
Yeah, we regularly play golf together. We're old friends, and David, who wrote for the Globe and Mail for many years, now retired, remains one of my better friends.
Does he try any stand-up comedy material on you?
I'm not sure he's doing much of that anymore. I think he tried, he went hard at it, and then, life tends to take you in different directions.
I think that was heavily encouraged by Gare Joyce, who does a lot of stand-up, and I think Gare Joyce got his bud David Schultz to do stand-up as just to boost his spirits, and maybe that's run its course. So no more stand-up from David Schultz, although he did do stand-up at a Toronto Mic'd listener experience once at Great Lakes Brewery.
Two of the funniest people I know are not comedians, and they're ex-sports writers, and Schultze's one of them, and Steve Buffery's the other one.
Buffery!
And they're both hysterically funny people, but I'm not sure they're hysterically funny on stage, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, not everybody's a stand-up comedian. Some people are just naturally, like me, for example, I might not be so hot on stage at Yuck Yucks or whatever, but I can roll with you on a live recording and get in some laughs. Well, to be determined. But okay, so speaking of Buffery, because when you say things, I might go off in tangents, but I think the last time I saw you was at the Crooked Q for Steve Buffery's retirement party.
I don't get out to Etobicoke very often. I come to do your show. I come to see Buffery, and I get to the Crooked Q every once in a while. And that was a fantastic night. It's funny. In our business, you can get people to come out once in a while for things. But most of the time, people go their own way. The Star people go their way. The Globe people go their way. The Sun people go their way. The TV people, TSN goes one direction. Sportsnet goes another. And everybody kind of sticks to your own. When it came to Steve Buffery's retirement, everybody showed up. It was phenomenal. Paul Beeston was there. And that guy's Bill Manning, who ran Toronto FC at the time. And it was just everybody from everywhere in sports. There were Star guys there. There were Globe guys there. There was like almost every name person in the sports industry, which tells you how much Buffery was loved and still is loved. And, that's phenomenal, because I think if you had one of those things for me, 7 people would show, and
I'd be there to cover it, though. It would be Schultze and I. Would Howard Berger make an appearance at your retirement party?
He might, because he works for a funeral home, Howard.
Yeah, Benjamin's.
And so, he may just be sort of sizing me up for the future.
Is that where you're going to end up? Because normally I do a pitch for Ridley Funeral Home, but you're going to end up at Benjamin's?
Well, it tends to be for my religion. I think there's 2 funeral homes in the city that are primarily Jewish. And so I suspect one day, I will be a customer.
Well, let me give you a gift, even though you won't end up there in many, many decades when it's time. But Ridley Funeral Home, they proudly support this show. Howard Berger does not work for Ridley Funeral Home, but this is a measuring tape for you, Steve, courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home.
I love a good measuring tape, so thank you very much. And we'll try and stay away from Ridley, or as long as we can. As long as most of us can.
So I'm going to get back to that point, because we mentioned the Crooked Q just because I did see you there at Steve Buffery's. And don't ask me how I got an invitation, but I was honored to be there. And all these like heavyweights. I remember taking a run at Paul Beeston. I wanted Beeston on Toronto Mike, and we weren't able to make it happen. Do you think you could do something with your vast Rolodex, and maybe you could help me get Paul Beeston on Toronto Mike?
You know what I've been trying to do? I've been trying to get Paul Beeston to write a book.
Well, he could start with this.
He just turned 80 recently, within weeks. And, if you think of what Paul Beeston has done and seen and been through, he ran the Blue Jays from day one. He built with Pat Gillick this phenomenal organization and this phenomenal team that won 2 World Series back-to-back, hasn't been topped by anyone but the one Yankees team since.
Right.
And so he went from there to the commissioner's office in Major League Baseball, where he was second in command of Major League Baseball. And some people thought he was going to be next guy to be commissioner, and it didn't work that way. And if you look at and then he came back to the Blue Jays and did the Alex Anthopoulos thing, right? 2015, 2016.
Until Shapiro was hired.
Yeah, the 2 greatest. I mean, the funny thing is how the whole Shapiro thing came down. The owner of the Blue Jays now, and the owner of everything now, is Edward Rogers. Yeah. And Edward Rogers had decided that he was going to replace Paul Beeston as president of the team. And so he went to Major League Baseball and he said, give me some suggestions and names of people. And, one of the people given to him was Kenny Williams of the White Sox. And so to get permission to speak to Kenny Williams of the White Sox, one of the Rogers people, whether it was Edward or one of his, other associates, called the owner of the White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, who's one of his best friends in the world, is Paul Beeston.
I love that story.
So he calls to ask permission to hire someone to replace Paul Beeston, hangs up the phone, Reinsdorf hangs up the phone, picks up the phone, calls Beeston, says they're trying to get rid of you.
Heads up, my friend. Wow. Why do you think, looking back, Mr. Rogers was so keen to get rid of Paul Beeston and Alex Anthopoulos in that regard?
Well, he wasn't so keen to get rid of Alex Anthopoulos as he was to get rid of Paul and start his own sort of operation. And Edward has a guy, I think his name is, maybe Roger Ray, but his last name is R-A-I. Okay. And he's one of his best friends, and he's one of the sort of sports advisors that he listens to. And Roger Ray had told him why the Blue Jays were badly run, and showed him a bunch of statistically proven things that, turned out to be nonsense, but nonetheless, they were that. And so right. Beeston was an easy guy to replace. He'd been around forever. He was old. What's that, 9 years ago?
2015. It was the end of 2015.
Yeah, it's 10 years ago. He was 70. Right. So that, you may look to be replacing that at that time. And so what happened was he started the process, got Shapiro's name through the commissioner's office, wound up hiring him out of Cleveland. And by doing so, basically eliminated Alex Anthopoulos from remaining as general manager because Alex would not work with Mark Shapiro under any circumstance. They did not see baseball the same way. They didn't like each other particularly. So there was a lot of sort of issues there. So Alex said, no, I'm out. At the last minute, before before the whole thing happened with Shapiro taking over, he offered Alex a long-term, expensive. He would have made him the highest paid general manager in baseball. Mr. Rogers spends money. We'll say that for him as an owner. He's not a cheap guy. And so he spends money, and he was willing to spend it on Alex at that point. And I wound up having breakfast with Alex at the time. Mm-hmm. And he had an offer from TSN. I think it was $1 million a year, which for Canadian television is enormous money.
Absolutely.
It was $1 million a year if he went and became their baseball guy, their voice of baseball. At that time, baseball was TSN was more interested in baseball than they are right now, for example. But if you look at it, Alex had the offer from TSN. He had the offer from the Blue Jays, and then he had a chance just to leave. And he wanted to stay had it been with Paul. Had it been with someone that he had regard for or could operate the way he wanted to operate. He loves Toronto. His family still is his in-laws live in Innisfil. Like, he bought them a home. He's here a lot. And so we're having breakfast and talking about, what's in front of him. And he's got the TSN offer. I said, you can't take that. You're going to hate TV. It's not for you.
Right.
And I said, if I were you, this is what I would do. Of course, nobody ever listens to me. But I said, I would take the Blue Jay job. I think it was 5 years. But get fired after 1 year, get paid out, and make some money here.
Right.
And he was too honest and honorable to do that.
But was the bottom line that, Shapiro would have veto power over baseball decisions?
Well, I think, like any president in any situation, you always have veto power.
Yeah, Shanny had it.
Everybody has a boss.
Right.
And so you have to go to your boss. And in that case, it wasn't that he had veto power. It's that if I'm working with you, Mike, and I don't agree with how you operate,
right,
then I can't work with you honestly and feel good about the work that I'm doing and feel honest about it. And I think in Alex's case, he looked at it and said, this wasn't for me. And so he didn't take the money that was in front of him. He went and took a year or so and wound up, until this season, doing a phenomenal job with the Atlanta Braves.
And it's funny because until this season, until right now, you can see the decline of the on the field performance of the Toronto Blue Jays, and no playoff victories and some underwhelming results. And as we're speaking, the Toronto Blue Jays are in first place in the AL East.
Go figure. I mean, this was a team. I remember talking to my son, who's a big baseball fan.
Who's an FOTM.
Yes. And had a very good episode, by the way.
Thank you. No bias there.
No, and my wife and I listened to all 2 hours of it. It's the most we've ever heard him speak. And he thought at the beginning of the year, this was the least likable Blue Jays team he's ever seen.
Right.
They couldn't hit. They had no offense. Nothing was going right. It just didn't look good. And then all of a sudden, parts from almost nowhere, with the exception of George Springer, who's had 3 declining seasons in a row.
Yeah, he looked like he was done, washed up last season.
So you're looking at it. This is a phenomenal story if you think about it. He's mid-30s. Baseball is nothing but statistics. You look at 3 years in a row, every meaningful stat, he's dropping.
Yeah.
So you're not saying at 35 he's going to be better than he was at 31. I mean, that's just not logical. 32, he was this. 33, he was this. 34, he was this. Numbers drop, numbers drop, numbers drop.
Right.
The only reason he's here is because, because the contract is so large and they have to pay him. And so now, all of a sudden, he's not having an MVP season because he plays in the same league with Aaron Judge, but he's having an absolutely astounding season. And so is Alejandro Kirk. And so is Addison Barger. And and there's so many guys that you wouldn't have said, this is not a Vladdy Guerrero, Bo Bichette show. As the Blue Jays are sitting in first place today, this is all the other guys. And it's actually phenomenal to watch. This has become a very likable team. and a very exciting team. And I'm not sure they're going to keep it up, although they have a great schedule for the next while, where they play the White Sox and some other crappy teams. Oakland, well, it's not Oakland anymore, but whatever they are now.
Right.
They have some easy games coming up after just sweeping the Yankees at home, and not just sweeping them, pounding them with the amount of runs they scored. So you're seeing what Springer's doing and what Kirk is doing, what Barger's doing, and then a guy like Ernie Clement, career sort of last guy on your roster, kind of barely able to be in the major leagues, he's having a phenomenal year. So where has this come from? How has this happened? The management people who are not my favorite people on earth,
right?
Are sitting there probably with their chests pumped out right now and laughing at the rest of us. But
well, listen, friend of Atkins, FOTM Hall of Famer Stu Stone, literally texted me last night with laughing at me because I'm in the same place as your son was at the beginning of the season, where I found this team very unlikable. And I think I was critical of Atkins on a number of fronts. Thought there was a lot of grounds for dismissal there. Now Stu's laughing at me, and my only reply was to quote FOTM Mike Wilner and say, "It's early."
Well, it's not early anymore, though. It
gets early awfully late.
We're 82-ish games in, or 83 games in. And
right. It's July.
It's the 4th of July.
Right.
Here's what's interesting. Ross Atkins spent $15 million of Mr. Rogers' money on Max Scherzer, who's basically done nothing at all. He barely pitched.
Right.
He traded for Jimenez, who's got this enormous contract, and he has done nothing. He signed Anthony Santander as a big money, $20 million a year-ish free agent. He's been hurt and done nothing. So you can almost say this is a fluke that it's happening the way it's happening, but it's kind of a nice fluke because, let's face it, people are kind of, grumbling about the Leafs and grumbling about the Raptors and grumbling about TFC. And there's a lot of grumbling to go around in this sporting market right now. So it's nice to see at least the Blue Jays are doing something, as unlikely and impossible as it all seems.
Well, we're going to do some grumbling on this program. Can you believe we're still in the description of your first appearance in April 2016? But I now remember about a half an hour ago when we mentioned the Crooked Q that I was going to ask you if you know this name. Cliff Thorburn. Do you know the name Cliff Thorburn?
Of course. Hall of Fame snooker player.
Okay, so I'm not a snooker
head. One of the great
head.
Canadian figures of all time.
He was in that seat you're sitting in a couple of days ago. Cliff made his Toronto Mike debut, and we did get a question about whether he had played snooker at the Crooked Q. It used to be called the Kingsway Billiards or something like that. But just funny small world story that if you want to hear from Cliff, I had a good, I don't know what it was, 80 minutes with the man just a couple of days ago.
I think I did a story on him about 30 years ago, give or take a week.
Yeah, he won the World Championship in 1980. But he was still, he was rated number 1 in the world, I think 81, 82. So he's still going, he doesn't retire. I think he retires in the mid-90s, I think. But yeah, I had to do a lot of catching up on my snooker history and Cliff Thorburn's role. And it's unbelievable a Canadian did that. He's apparently, debatably, depending who you ask, the greatest, and I don't know what's happened recently, but the greatest snooker player who does not hail from the United Kingdom.
Well, I don't know what the other countries are. I'm not big on world snooker.
Ireland, Australia.
Having said that, though, what you've seen in this country is, boy, has sport changed from what we might have grown up with in different times.
Right.
Because I remember, and I'm a newspaper junkie, having grown up in the industry and reading it from the day I was born, basically. I would always follow where Canadians all over the world, whether it was tennis or whether it was golf or whether it was
squash.
It was always the little, the small print at the back of the agate pages of the newspaper. Yep. And so you'd look for Cliff Thorburn's name or George Knudsen's name or Dave Barr or whoever it was. And now we're seeing, Canadians tennis players that we do know. They're not just little names in the newspaper, or golfers that we do know that are leading in large tournaments or sometimes winning them.
Or Shea Gilgeous-Alexander.
Well, did you see the contract he just signed? 70-something million a year.
Yeah. Wow.
I'll tell you how much Canadian basketball has changed just in my time. I got sent to Los Angeles in the late 80s to do a story on a basketball player named Mike Smrek. I don't know if you know that name.
Rings a bell, but I'm not.
It's spelled Smrek. Mike Smrek's from Niagara Falls, Ontario, if I'm correct. And he was the backup to the backup center of the Los Angeles Lakers with Kareem Jabbar.
Right.
In those great years, Magic Johnson and Jabbar. I got sent to go to Los Angeles to do a piece on Mike Smrek. Why? Because he had won an NBA ring. And like nobody had ever, I don't think any.
Right, because this is pre-Bill Winnington. This is,
nobody, I don't
80s.
believe, had ever done that. But I think he got 2 in the end. And I spent like 2 days hanging out with Mike Smrek and just, he lived in the hotel right across from the Forum. It was kind of fun. And I'm in the Lakers. In those days, you're in the locker rooms interviewing players. I'm in the Lakers locker room, and the PR guy is supposed to set me up to talk to Jabbar.
Right.
And I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. Get a chance to talk to Jabbar. He's a very bright man.
Sure.
And Jabbar thinks I'm a gag. Because why would anybody want to do a story on Mike Smrek? So he thinks I'm there as a joke.
Practical,
one of those
blunders,
one of those David
jokes.
Letterman kind of setup guys. But instead, I just wanted to know, what he thought of him. And
there was slim pickings back then.
There was,
Leo Rowdens, when was he drafted in the first round? First ever Canadian to be drafted in the first round. But
I played high school. Not I personally played, but my school played high school against Leo Rowdens. I remember.
Oh, he's the kid from Keele Street. Yeah. That's what they called Leo.
And yeah, but now we have guys signing for $70 million and winning MVPs and playoff MVPs, and it's crazy.
We've come a long way, baby. Okay, and also a quick fun fact that kind of blows my mind. Okay, because when we were doing our Jays chat there for a bit, we talked about George Springer. Look at this resurgence from George Springer, but he can't win MVP. Aaron Judge plays whatever here. You do know there's only 2 years difference in the ages of George Springer and Aaron Judge. One is 35 and one is 33. Doesn't Springer present as a much older person than Aaron Judge?
Well, because Aaron Judge presents as not an age. Do those superheroes that they make the movies? Do they have ages?
Avengers.
Yeah, all the movies that are coming out all the time.
I bet you'd win a bar bet or two if you said you told them. There are only 2 years difference between Aaron Judge and George Springer. You
2 years and about 100 pounds of muscle. Standing beside Aaron Judge is a fascinating thing to do, because he is the most built guy that plays a sport in a power way that equals his body. I think that there is really in any sport. He's incredible.
Freak of nature.
And he seems
LeBron-esque.
Yeah, he seems like he's such a nice man. Like when you're around him or covering him, my little exposure to him has all been very positive, and it's nice to see someone who's enjoying being that great. And you look at this season, he's having although he's been in a bit of a slump lately, he's having one of the greatest seasons of any right-handed hitter in history. What he's hitting, not even just home runs, it's everything. It's crazy to watch. And it's like Superman it's like they peel the uniform off of him.
It was November 2017, Steve Simmons, when you returned to Toronto, Mike. So we're about, a year and a half later. So we got you 18 months later. It was episode 288, and this is what I wrote at the time. Mike and Steve discuss several topics, including the recent Post-Media and Tour star swap and cut, this newspaper deal. Cash Palmer. We talked about Cash. How's Cash doing?
I would rather change the subject, unfortunately.
We'll move on from that one then. We'll think of Cash Palmer. The cancellation of the Reporters, which I'm going to actually revisit in a bit because I'm going to ask you about somebody else. But Bob Elliott, I guess we always talk about Bob. How's Bob doing?
Bob's doing great. Bob is very involved with minor baseball in Toronto, very involved with his website, the Canadian Baseball Network. Still loves baseball more than anyone I know. And
hanging out with his grandkids.
Yeah, loving the grandchild thing. And the thing I love about Bob, he reads the newspapers late. He doesn't ever read them on the day that they come out. I think they just pile up on his desk and he catches up. Sure. Because I'll get emails from him or text messages like 3 weeks after I've written something saying, good piece on this. And I can hear it in his voice coming to me, but that was kind of
He's got quite the voice.
Yes.
Love Bob Elliott. Okay, we talked about The Athletic. We talked about the Argos, TFC, Roy Halladay, Phil Kessel. Of course, we got to talk Phil Kessel. Joey Bats, his diabetes. How is your, I'm pausing in this, reading the description to find out how you're doing physically. How's your health?
My health is about as good as I would expect. I'm handling diabetes about as well as I can expect. Unfortunately, I have neuropathy, which is a side effect of diabetes, which is you lose your nerves in your feet and in your hands. And I've lost them in my feet and partially in my hands. And so what happens is that you lose your ability to balance the same way you would have balanced before. Or say you're going for a walk and you're not thinking of where you're walking, you might trip a lot easier than the average person will. For example, I used to coach minor hockey and really loved it. I used to play as well, and I can't put skates on anymore in balance. I just don't have the feeling in my feet that gives me the kind of balance that makes it safe for me to skate. So I'm not able to do that. So it's not like it's changed my life completely, but it just means that there's things you have to be aware of that you weren't aware of before. And that's what, getting older is part of that, I guess.
You've had to make adjustments.
I mean, I've had diabetes now for 30, coming up to 35 years. And so, this is really the only, I would say, really bad thing that's happened physically in all that time.
Okay. We also talked about your sleep disorder. How are your sleeps these days?
Oh boy. Now you're on a new subject. I can't sleep. I've never been able to sleep. I've tried a million different things. I have gone from, sleep clinics to hospital visits to hypnosis to psychologists. I mean, I've gone through every single possible thing you could have gone through, and it has not helped. I'm just bad at it. And I'm fortunate and really fortunate that I've had a job that I don't have to be up early and be at work at 8 in the morning or 8:30 in the morning.
Do you wear that's a hand-me-down. My wife got a new one and she said, "Do you want to try this?" And I said, "Okay, let me see." It's a Garmin watch, but it tells me how my sleep is. Like every day I get a sleep score, and it talks about how long your sleep was. Did you get into REM? All these interesting things. And REM, not the band, Yeah.
I'd rather the band, by the way. I think I get more of the band than I do sleep.
But you're not, and I know you've done, of course, it must be annoying actually when you say, I have a sleep disorder, and people are like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And you're like, yeah, I've tried everything.
Everybody has an answer except one that works for me.
Jeez.
And
but how many hours are you getting? Go ahead.
Not very many. At night, I'm getting almost none. I get most of them in the morning. I think I just pass out from exhaustion.
This sounds terrible, Steve.
And so what's happened also is because of neuropathy, that's an element that's made it worse. Because what you have is you've got tingling in your feet that, your feet aren't real comfortable being under sheets and things like that. And so, that's played a part in me falling asleep, which has made it more difficult.
But have you thought about flipping everything like a shift worker or something and just maybe be like a vampire?
I've gone so many different ways and so many different, if I ever have time to write a book about another thing in my life, it's going to be about, what a miserable time I've had trying to figure out how to sleep.
Well, speaking of the word miserable, I would think with as little sleep as you're getting that you would be miserable. I think you'd have a justification for being Mr. Cranky Pants with such little sleep.
Well, I'm going to quote two of my friends, Bruce Arthur, who works for the Star, and Buffrey.
Yeah.
And they said that I'm sort of this freak of nature, that like they'll use me because we've been to a lot of Olympics together.
Right.
And they'll say, you make no sense. You don't get any sleep, and you wake up the next day in a better mood than we did after sleeping 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever it was. And they don't understand it. I think I've just had to learn to adjust, and I think it's affected me in other ways, but you just try and go on and do what you do and smile and do the things you like to do. Otherwise, what are you living for?
More on Bruce Arthur later when I bring up the reporters. But we also kicked out the jams that episode. So if people want to hear Steve Simmons play and discuss his 10 favorite songs of all time, that is episode 288. One more to go here, and then we'll actually start this episode. So the third visit of Steve Simmons was October 2022. That was your most recent visit until now. It was episode 1142. So 1142. It's quite a gap between 2 and 3. I'm just looking, but there was a pandemic in there, so we'll blame that. Mike chats with Steve Simmons about what you wrote about Akeem Alou, and Wayne Simmons. Your polarizing presence. This is a constant thread. We'll revisit it at some point today. But how long you'll write your new book, A Lucky Life, Gretzky, Crosby, Kawhi, and more from the best seat in the house. That was your fabulous book. Loved reading it. And that was, believe it or not, and I don't know if we have that kind of time today, but we went 2 hours and 20 minutes when we talked in October 2022. So there you go. Now this is your 4th appearance. And here we are. Okay.
We could just run back the other ones. But by the way,
some of them we'll revisit.
I have a question. Is that George the Animal Steele over there?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I mentioned Stu Stone. So Stu Stone is close personal friends with Atkins. In fact, I went to a movie premiere. Stu directs movies, and Atkins was in the row in front of me. They're good friends. So when I would be critical, and I think I was well within my right to be critical of some decisions and moves made by Atkins, Stu would kind of just defend Atkins, and he's having the best time right now. Like, you should see these text messages. He's acting like we won the World Series, and I'm just saying, it is not as early as it used to be, to coin a new phrase. Yes. But it is early July, and I'm kind of morphing into a playoffs only guy. But yeah, George the Animal Steele. This is from my time, WWF time. I was a big mid to...
Yeah, I have a box of these at home. I have it like...
Oh, do you have the ring?
Yeah, I don't think I have the ring anymore, but I have a box of figures, and the kids have drawn over a bunch of them from earlier in the
don't
days.
Throw those out, Steve.
Oh, no, I'm definitely not throwing... I can't throw anything out, but that's...
Oh, you get some hoarding going on there.
Yes. Lots of old, sporting, collectible kind of stuff. My wife will throw all of it out tomorrow if she could.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so I have to ask you about somebody who was in the news recently. But before I do that, I'm going to let you know that I have a lasagna in my freezer for you, Steve Simmons, courtesy of Palma Pasta. Have you ever enjoyed Palma Pasta?
I have, and the lasagna is awesome.
Okay, I got one for you. Thank you, Palma Pasta, for feeding us all last week at TMLX 19. And we were at Great Lakes Brewery, and Great Lakes brought us our first beer and, of course, fresh craft beer from Great Lakes. The guys from Great Lakes were here earlier today to record a new episode of Between Two Fermenters, a podcast from Great Lakes that I am lucky enough to produce. And speaking of such, I highly recommend Building Toronto's Skyline from Nick Iones. That's a great podcast. He's in condo development, and there's some great conversations about building Toronto's skyline. And, of course, recyclemyelectronics.ca, Mr. Simmons. That's where you go if you have old cables. I know you said you don't throw anything out, but if you have these old cables, old electronics, old devices, old laptops, make that visit to recyclemyelectronics.ca, put in your postal code, because you can drop all of that off to be properly recycled so the chemicals don't end up in our landfill. Let's do that, Steve.
I've got a few things for them.
Okay. Well, listen, you might need a bigger boat, as they say. By the way, did you see Jaws in theaters?
I believe many years ago.
Well, I mean, 50 years ago. So Jaws just celebrated its 50th birthday.
That's why I said many.
All right, 50 years ago, you were old enough to see. I'm trying to gauge the age, but you were old enough to see Jaws in theaters 50 years ago, is what you're telling me.
I was university age, if I recall.
You can do that then. Okay, I'm going to go to my YouTube channel and play a little piece of audio. Here it is, right here. Hopefully this works. Let me see what happens when I play this from YouTube.
Well, Tim, this is our last show.
Yep. How many podcasts have we done?
I don't know.
This is our 313th.
313th.
Yeah, we've been listened to all around the world. It's just amazing how many different countries, people download and listen to it. We've had 6.5 million downloads, which is pretty good. So
how many?
6.5 million downloads.
That's an awful lot. Thanks everybody for listening, and toodaloo.
So this is from, I guess, a couple of weeks ago now. This was Don Cherry seemingly signing off for the last time. You heard those words that were said there, and this was promoted on the official Don Cherry X account as the finale. So I know that there's some, Joe Warmington had a chat with Don Cherry, and Don suggested they were just done for the season, just done for the year. But I don't know. What are your thoughts? Was that Don signing off for the last time, or we have to wait and see in the fall?
It sure sounded like Don signing off for the last time, albeit I think late just by listening to him. That said, Joe and him are very close. He's close with Joe Warmington. And every time Don has something to say, he tends to say it through Joe Warmington, the columnist of the Sun. And so if he's planning to come back and he wants to come back, more power to him for being able to do it.
But he does sound like a man who maybe deserves a break.
You know, Don went about as long as you can go, I think.
Yeah. He's in his 90s.
You know, on the air and podcasting. Some every once in a while, you'll hear somebody who's late 80s or early 90s, and they'll sound incredible.
Oh, Brian McFarlane.
But then every once in a while, you can hear Don there, and you really don't feel very comfortable listening, do you?
See, it's entirely, again, I'm merely speculating, but it's entirely possible that was the finale, and Don just forgot or doesn't realize it. Who knows what's going on in the Cherry household? Yeah,
and I to be honest, I've not seen one or heard one of the podcasts. I did not.
No, me neither.
When he finished with Hockey Night in Canada, I never saw Don again, and so I never heard him again. And so, if people were out there listening, because he had an enormous following, and still has an enormous following.
Oh, sure. No doubt.
And so, whether people want to listen to him or believe to listen to him, that's terrific. I've never heard it. How many years has it been since the whole thing happened with Sportsnet? And
the you people come here for your milk and your honey. Good question. I wish I could. You know what I think? COVID messed up my sense of time. Like, I feel like I used to be good at that. Oh, that was 5 years ago. That was 10 years ago. But with COVID, so Don was gone pre-COVID.
Yeah, so it's pretty long. It's a long time now. Yeah. And, I really like Don Cherry. I mean,
well, let me set you up, and then we'll go off on Don, which is the big question I have, because it was raised. Who was it? Jeff Lumby made a passion plea to get Don Cherry the Order of Canada. And so my specific question to you, and then I would like you to talk about Don for a moment here, like his place in 2025 and how we look back at Don Cherry. But do you think, Steve Simmons, that Don Cherry deserves the Order of Canada?
I don't know who deserves the Order of Canada based on who gets it and who doesn't get it.
Cliff Thorburn got it.
Oh, good. I'm saying
Donovan Bailey's got it.
I don't know. Often it took Donovan Bailey way too long. It was ridiculous how many times he got passed over. But I don't know who and what the qualifications are. So it's not for me to say whether he does or doesn't deserve. What he does deserve is Hockey Hall of Fame recognition, in my opinion. Now, it can come in one of two ways. Mm-hmm. It can come with the Foster Hewitt Award, which is for broadcasting, or it can come from the Builder category, which is what did you do for hockey? Mm. And in my view, whether you like him or you don't like him, whether you found his opinions, crazy, or you found his opinions perfect for you, he factored in the way the game was looked at. He factored in the way we watched hockey. I'll never forget seeing a Saturday night press box crowd at Maple Leaf Gardens or at the Scotiabank Arena now. Everybody would huddle around the television just to see what Don had to say. Half of them critics, half of them supporters. It was an amazing thing to watch. He had an audience. He had something to say. Yes, he did it in ways that maybe you don't like. Yes, there was elements to how he broadcast that you could take issue with. But what you can't take issue with is, did he have impact? Did he have impact on the game, in how we view the game, in how we talk about the game? And so for me, somewhere along the way, he should have gotten by now Hall of Fame recognition in one of those two categories. But unfortunately, like everything in our world now, we've gotten so politically correct and I don't know if woke is the right word, but just politically correct, that we're not willing to open doors to people who maybe made it challenging for you to talk about certain things. And so in Don's case and in other people's case, they haven't gotten the Hockey Hall of Fame recognition. And the Hockey Hall of Fame, the broadcast award, by the way, is a bit of a sham.
Are you in it?
No. And I, to be honest, I think I'm in the same kind of situation where enough people don't care for how I do my job. Or
You're polarizing.
Yes. And
Don Cherry's polarizing.
And I understand it. And him and I, for years, were very close and had a great relationship. And then we had a bit of a falling out, and at this stage of our lives, that weren't really able to repair it very well. But I'll use an example. The award is the Foster Hewitt Award, and it's for broadcasters. Mm-hmm. And the guys who vote on it are primarily play-by-play people. And so what they do on an annual basis is they either put a play-by-play guy from a city or a color guy from the city, an analyst. Most of them doing, the local television of the local teams. And so many of the people who do play-by-play around the NHL have been inducted as, through the Foster Hewitt Award. But you know who hasn't gotten recognition? Dave Hodge, Ron McLean. Anyone who's hosted, anyone who's not gone the play-by-play route.
Right.
Well, does the guy doing play-by-play in Hartford, is he more Hall of Fame than Don Cherry being the voice of Hockey Night in Canada? Or Ron McLean being the host of Hockey Night in Canada? Or Dave Hodge before them?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Dave.
Introducing both of them. Dave was there before McLean. Dave was there with Don Cherry when he first started with Coach's Corner.
Can we put a pin in that? Because I'm glad you mentioned Dave Hodge, and this will kind of lead to a little reporter's talk. But first, thinking about Don Cherry, so this debate, this impassioned plea from Jeff Lumby that Don Cherry deserves the Order of Canada. My first thought is, how can you give a man the Order of Canada when he did what Dave Hodge explained so eloquently in this short clip that you might recognize because you were in the room, Steve Simmons. I was in the room, you were in the room. But let's listen to this quick Dave Hodge hit.
Back in the early days, Don would call me on Friday night and would tell me everything that he wanted to talk about, and I would say no, maybe, and here's what we are going to talk about. But one particular conversation we had was Don saying, "What's that game the other night, boy? And that Patty Roy, he was making saves. I got to talk about Patty Roy." You can see why you're insisting. And I said, "Don, if you want to talk about that goaltender, we will talk about Patrick Waugh." And Don said, "I call him Patty Roy. If I want to call him Patty Roy, I can call him Patty Roy." I said, "By doing so, Don, you're insulting the man, you're insulting his family, his friends, and the entire French-speaking population of this country, largely based in Quebec. If you mention the name Patty Roy on TV, you will be corrected and hear the same speech." So we talked about something else.
And that's Dave Hodge. That is perfect Dave Hodge. That's he did not like that Don Cherry mispronounced names, and some of them intentionally.
Oh, I think all of them intentionally,
and
to be honest.
He did not like when he would make errors. Dave is a stickler for broadcast excellence. And so the names have to be right. The facts have to be right. The opinions need to be reasoned. The delivery has to be right. And so he had great frustration working with Don because Don wanted to be a character. And Dave didn't want him to be a caricature. Dave wanted him to be a hockey broadcaster. And so if I'm saying that I think that Don belongs in the Hall of Fame, I suspect Dave's vote may not be the same as mine.
But I think Dave makes a great point, which is how offensive it is to Quebecers and Francophone community in this country. We are, as you know, your Canadian history. This is a bilingual nation, and he was so purposefully offensive towards our French Canadians.
And purposely offensive to Europeans, yes. And purposely offensive to Swedes, and purposely to Russians. And, it's one of those things that, Rodney Dangerfield was offensive, doing his stand-up. And so was Don Rickles. And so, but they were darn funny at that time.
They didn't get the Order of Canada either.
No. One of the things, working with Dave Hodge was one of the great pleasures of my life. Yeah. And what an honor it was. And the thing about Dave was, Dave knew exactly what he wanted to do in every show he was ever on, what he wanted to get to, what he believed in, what he, how he wanted the show to go. And every once in a while, I can get emotional and I can get excitable. And while I won't, mispronounce names intentionally or any of that. So one Sunday morning, I got excited about whatever topic it was we were talking about on the reporters. And I went off on one of my, tangents. We go to commercial. He turns to me and says, "No one wants to hear that on Sunday morning." And it was like, "You're too loud. You're too excited. Like, calm it down." He didn't have to say anything more.
Right.
But Dave Naylor used to be on the show too. He's a TSN football guy.
Right.
Dave Naylor would say, "We live in fear of upsetting Dave," because he was such a pro and such an incredible influence for us work-wise. And every once in a while the show was going on, he would just turn and give you a look. And the look was, "Shut up."
So my little taste of that is that every single year for several years now, I record with Dave Hodge his best of the year in music. So this is an annual tradition. Usually this records, I want to say like late November, maybe early December, but it was in person this past year. We had to do some remotes during the pandemic, but I was glad to have him back in the basement. I hope to do it again this coming winter. But just that recording of the top 100 Dave Hodge songs of the year, I get more nervous about that episode than I think any other episode I do the entire year, because I don't want to disappoint Dave Hodge.
Well, how many hours would that show take to do?
Well, it's all live to tape, right? So it doesn't take that long. We probably recorded it in an hour, and then I probably add the music in post. Yeah, and it ends up being like a 90-minute special.
But I understand that when you worked with someone like Dave, who was so professional, who was so good at his job, who, just to watch it, just to appreciate how he did his job watching it. I mean, I was there for 15 years. I was the only person from start to finish who was on the panel.
So you're there for the Brunt era.
I lived through Brunt. I lived through Cox. I lived through lots of people.
Arthur. Yeah.
We had a lot of Michael Farber when he was healthy, and then Michael Farber was sick and missed a few years, and then he came back.
Right.
For a long time, I had the middle seat. I had Michael Farber to my right, and I had Dave to my left. And it reminded me of, if you were in class in grade 5 and the two smartest kids in the class were right beside you,
right.
Right. One on each side, you were in the dumb seat. And that's how I felt most Sunday mornings, that I was in the dumb seat because Farber was using words I didn't even know, and Hodge was saying things that were just so darn smart that, I had to take a back seat.
So tell the listenership that recording I played of Dave Hodge. Where was that recorded?
I believe that was when we were at the Paradise Theater. We did our last actual show was live at the Paradise Theater, which is on Bloor, I think.
Is it College?
College. Where?
I think it's College.
Okay.
I bike by it all the time, but I believe it's College. But,
okay.
But the Paradise, it could be Bloor though. But it's one of those streets. We're in the right neighborhood. But the Paradise, I was there because that entire recording was dropped into the Toronto Mic'd feed as a bonus episode, basically, to witness. But when I was there, so I had two thoughts at the time. Now we're going back several years because this is,
if you remember, Brendan Shanahan was there that night too.
How could I forget? I waited afterwards. Because he went. I've wanted to get Brendan Shanahan on this show for a long time, but not to talk Leafs. Now that he's we'll talk about that in a minute. He's no longer president, but to talk Mimico and about his youth. I mean, he grew up down the street. He went to the same high school I went to. I wanted to talk to him, but anyway, we'll get to that in a minute, Brendan Shanahan. But I did wait a long time to finally meet him and tell him what I wanted to do. But there were so many people there trying to get his attention, I eventually just gave up and biked home. And I'll never forget that night. That's the night somebody stole the lights off my bike that night, locked up outside the Paradise Theater. Okay, so at the time when we recorded that episode, and I was honored to be a part of it, a couple of things. One is I thought maybe this was the first in a series. Because it was a full house. It went so well. I said, maybe there'll be regular live recordings of the reporters. But that was a one and done. Was there any conversation ever about doing another one?
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of conversation about what was going to happen to the show and where it was going to go. And there was some interest. I believe this is pre-COVID. But
I think it was pre-COVID.
There was some interest in sort of going from place to place with the show and doing it live. And and having like live audiences and whether it was to do it on university campuses or different things, there seemed to be, and there was producers interested. Like I'm talking about guys who were very established in the industry.
But this never came to be.
No, and I think what happened is that the belief that it was going to happen, and then COVID hit, and then everything fell apart, and then guys went in their own directions.
Right.
I think we made a giant mistake when the reporters ended. And the giant mistake was we didn't take the show immediately to podcast.
Okay, so the second thing, because I teased it by saying two things I thought at the time. The one was more live events, but the second one is, why isn't this a podcast?
Well,
and I had conversations with Dave about this.
Yeah, and Dave was the one person at the time who I think really, when the show ended, he was ready for the show to end. I don't think he wanted to.
He's a music guy.
Yeah, but I don't think he wanted to see what it would become.
Right.
Bruce was the youngest of us, and it was Bruce and Farber and myself.
Right.
And I'm mad now. It's all these years later. I'm mad now that we didn't do it, because I really truly believe, had we taken the show to podcast immediately with Dave or with another host, then we would be one of the top sporting podcasts in Canada right now, in my opinion.
Well, at the time, I had lengthy, serious discussions with Dave Hodge about the reporters becoming a podcast. And I think the hiccup, that the reason it never happened, was Dave was keen on, getting the money up front. So it always comes down to the money, right? Like, so getting the money up front for something, and I was more I'm not a sales guy, as you know, it's Steve Simmons, but I was more keen on creating the compelling content and then getting the money. So it was more about what comes first.
When you look at, again, retrospect being what it is, people were not making a whole lot of money in podcasting at that time. And since then, we've seen what's happened in the United States, where some of these podcasts have gone like wildly.
Oh, like Smartless and all those.
Yeah. Smartless and the one with the Kelsey brothers and the Kelsey wife. And there's a lot of stuff out there where guys are making ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching.
Right.
I thought there was a market for us. I still think there is a market for us, but I think we missed the opportunity to hit for money if we had gone through with it. And, again, none of us had enough foresight at the moment to see what was going to happen in the industry and how big podcasting was going to become.
Well, I could just tell you, I took my best run at this. Dave and I definitely took my best run at this. It was a real thing, and I really thought it might happen when we had that live event. And I was thinking, okay, so all of you at the time, and I think Bruce has moved away, but all of you at the time lived in the GTA. Well, do we call where Dave lives the GTA? Sure. What the heck?
Mike was in Montreal.
Right. No, I had to finish the sentence, which is, except for Michael Farber, who was in Montreal. So I felt like you meet on, I don't know, Zencastr or Riverside, whatever. Everybody meets there and records, and then I just grab that source audio and package it up. And it could have been like a pretty low overhead, every week, every Sunday or whatever we decide. I know it's in the rearview mirror, but not really. Like, you're all still with us. You're all still sharp as a tack, right? I don't know if you were ever sharp as a tack, Steve Simmons, but you're as sharp as you ever were, right? But so maybe it's not too late. I'm just throwing it into the atmosphere.
One of my favorite podcasts, I guess, is Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts.
Sure.
And one of the giant mistakes that Elliot and at the time Jeff Merrick made when they put that thing together was they didn't own the podcast.
Right. Yeah, it's a Rogers production.
It's a Rogers production. Right. So they're being paid to do the podcast as opposed to having ownership of the podcast.
Hired guns.
And I was fortunate. I did the last, I think, 10 episodes, maybe 15 of when Bob McCown was still doing his podcast.
Sure.
And I was his co-host for the last 15 episodes. And, for a couple of years there, they were doing pretty well financially. They lost their big sponsor, which I think put them in, which is why eventually he pulled the plug on the thing.
Oh, there's a sports betting sponsor that shelled out some big bucks.
Yeah, and so they were paying, he was paying for, John Shannon was getting paid and Bob was getting paid and the producer was getting paid. And, there was a fair bit of money going around at that point. And at the end, there just wasn't any. But, I thought, again, had we started before Bob and before 32 Thoughts and before some of these other ones, who knows, where we might be.
I just want an excuse to play a little of that here. Any excuse to do that, you know that. Okay, but how's Bob doing? Have you had any contact with him lately?
I have not spoken to him since about a week after we did our last show, which would have been just around December. And he was talking at the time about doing a book and writing another book. He had written one previously, which was a bestseller, I believe. And so he was looking at doing another one, and we talked a little bit about that. And you know, I gave him some names of people to consider to use for writing, and that was as far as it went. And I've exchanged the odd text with him since then, but not really seen him or heard him.
Is Bob McCown, is he a good guy?
I don't know well enough to answer that question. I've worked with him. He's an exceptionally talented broadcaster. He, like, one of the most talented who's ever worked in this country. An exceptionally talented radio guy.
Sure.
But I've never been socially engaged with him in my life or in his life. And so I really can't answer that. I don't know him.
It's funny that answer. He's a great broadcaster, because I knew things going on at Q107, but I wasn't going to put them in public. But Maureen Holloway was here. And I asked Maureen, this is before the Jennifer Valentine video came out talking about John Derringer. But I asked Maureen Holloway, what's it like working with John Derringer? And she gave me this look, and I think she knew I knew, but she wasn't going to say anything, again, pre-Valentine video. But she said to me, John Derringer is an excellent broadcaster. And I think that's the code. I feel like that's the move, right? Like, let's talk about something like that.
Yeah, but here's the difference. If I'm Jennifer Valentine and I know what's happened to me while working with whomever, then I'm going to view it differently. But if I'm in a circumstance where I work with a person while he broadcasts and all he does is broadcast and we don't see each other from the minute that ends to the next time we go on the air, then I don't know him. And so, I think you have to answer the question based on, what your knowledge base is.
So the facts, these aren't facts, of course, these are opinions. The opinion of the consensus is that both John Derringer and Bob McCown are excellent broadcasters.
Well, I'll give you one thing. Yeah. I have worked with both in small doses.
Right.
I never found Bob to treat people badly. That's not what I found. I saw instances at times of John doing that. And that's not in a Me Too-ish way. I'm talking just
ripping someone a new one, maybe.
Yeah,
I've heard these stories
I saw
too.
that, and I know some people, prominent people in our industry now, if they were honest, would tell you those stories. It's not my place to tell them, but in Bob's case, I working with Bob is, at least when I worked with him, I never found him to be a real pleasant person. He just came in, he did the show, he finished the show, and you left. There was no relationship to speak of that I found. I didn't have, when we were doing the podcast together, he'd say, well, okay, let's tape at 10. I'd come on at 5 to 10. We would do the show, finish the show, and say, see you tomorrow. And that was the extent of the relationship. Sometimes when you do a show with somebody, you can become best friends. You can become, close. If you cover a beat with somebody, for example, they could become your best friend, the guy, from the other paper or from the other radio station or TV station or wherever. I worked with Bob in a variety of different things, primarily as a fill-in co-host on Primetime Sports, and then all these years later, getting called out of the blue to, can you do some podcasts? I wasn't expecting to get that call, to be honest.
Well, then you were filling the John Shannon void.
Yeah, John Shannon left, and here's the thing. When Bob McCown phones, you take the call because he's Bob McCown, because he's Dave Hodge, because, when you're one of those guys, I don't know if you saw the thing the other day, Bob McKenzie just retired.
It's on my list.
And Bob McKenzie, to me, was a difference maker in his industry. And when Bob McKenzie calls or Hodge calls or Brian Williams calls or McCown calls, you take the call. So when McCown called, I took the call and said, do you want to do it? And I said, give me a few days to figure this out. And all the time I'm thinking, Bob McCown wants me. That's pretty cool. And I did it and I enjoyed it.
Okay, fair enough. Now, your book, we mentioned it in the description for your third appearance. It's called A Lucky Life. We have many books, but this is the one about your life. A Lucky Life. Gretzky, Crosby, Kawhi, and more from the best seat in the house. I want to ask you about the first name you drop in the, what's that called? The subtitle? I guess that's the title still. You talk about Wayne Gretzky. Steve Simmons, I would love to have a little chat with you about the current status, the opinions of the typical Canadian with regards to number 99 Wayne Gretzky as we speak in July. Actually, it's Independence Day in the USA. What an appropriate time to talk about Wayne Gretzky.
Well, I'd rather keep the politics out of this because I'm not the most politically well person in the world. So I'm not going to sit here and judge Wayne Gretzky based on what his relationship might be with the vile president of the United States of America.
Well, we know where he was on election night.
Yes. And we know, obviously, there is a relationship. Does the relationship mean that he's, pleased with, what he's doing or is about to do or may be doing to our country? Am I bothered by that? Yeah. But it doesn't change what I think of him or what I think of his career or what I think of him now as a broadcaster or any of these other things. I think you have to separate, one from the other. I don't think Wayne Gretzky, because he might golf with Donald Trump every once in a while, is also involved with Middle Eastern, politics and philosophies as to how Donald Trump is dealing with.
Okay, but Steve, we're talking about a very specific threat made many, many times by the President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, where he basically threatened to annex this country and wants to make Canada the 51st state. Like with that specific threat, it is interesting that Wayne Gretzky has never made for himself, speaking for himself, he's never made any comment about that. He's been completely silent on that specific subject.
Didn't his wife come out and say something?
But that's different, right?
As far as I'm concerned, there's the mistake. If you're Wayne Gretzky, and you mentioned Order of Canada earlier today,
which he never picked up, by the way.
He never picked up his Order of
Never
Canada?
picked that up in Ottawa.
That
no.
I didn't know. He's won every award you can possibly win. He's been Mr. Hockey. He's been, everything to everybody at various times. What he should have said at the time was, I don't agree with what's going on. I don't agree with what's happening with Canada. I am a Canadian. I love this country. I have worn the flag competing internationally. I have been a general manager for Team Canada at an Olympic Games. I have, there's never been a time where I didn't feel to be proud to be Canadian. And I think he should have come up with something along those lines.
But he didn't.
I know he didn't. And that bothers me.
I'm fired up right now, Steve Simmons.
But what are we now supposed to think then?
I think his silence speaks volumes in the sense that I have no choice but to consider the fact that maybe he too would like to see Canada become the 51st state.
Well, that I can't speak for, but I will say this, and I've been fascinated by this over the years. Wayne Gretzky grew up in Ontario, and he lives in Florida. Mario Lemieux grew up in Quebec, and he lives in Pittsburgh. Steve Yzerman grew up in Ottawa area, and he lives in Detroit. You can go through the greatest Canadian. Steve Nash is where, and outside of Donovan Bailey, there's a lot of guys who. Darryl Sittler lives in Buffalo. There's a lot of guys who do not live in Canada for whether it's taxes or whether it's housing or whether it's weather or whether it's whatever. You can run through it, and you can sit back and say, what does that mean for you? I am a very proud Canadian. I spend 2 to 3 months every year in Florida. Why? Because I love the weather. I love my place down there, and it makes me happy. Does it mean I in any way agree with their politics? No. Does it mean that I have any use for Trump? No. Does it mean I like what they're doing with our country and tariffs and all that? No. But I still want to do what I like to do for me. And so I understand why Gretzky lives where he lives and why, where Lemieux lives where he lives and everybody else seems to. And so some of, these are, if you took a list of 20 of the greatest athletes, entertainers, comedians, whatever, and say, where are they living? Sure. Well, most of them.
Neil Young's down there. Joni Mitchell's down there.
Most of them are not living here.
I'm glad you, Kate. Well, we'll get back to Donovan Bailey in a minute because he's living in Mississauga these days. And I think just to put a loop on the Wayne Gretzky thing, because we've heard people speak on his behalf. You mentioned his wife. I think Doug Ford spoke on his behalf. I think somebody I'm missing, maybe it was Bobby Orr, I think it was Bobby Orr who spoke on his behalf. The fact that Wayne Gretzky didn't make such a simple statement to say, I'm a proud Canadian, I love Canada, and Canada will always be a sovereign state, like always be a sovereign nation. Like a simple statement like that. But the fact that we never heard anything of the sort from him, even during the Four Nations when he was our ambassador. What was the term? I can't remember now, but he was the ambassador or whatever for Team Canada, and he was in his suit, and there was not even a reference to the fact that I'm friends with Donald J. Trump. You're right. I'm not going to shit on him for being a Trumper and for wearing a MAGA hat. I'm not even going down that road. I know there's a lot of people I know and respect who like Donald Trump and support his politics, and that's a whole different category. But to the 51st state nonsense, to simply make just a statement like, of course Canada is not for sale and will never join the USA. Canada's proud sovereign nation. Like that's it. That's all we were looking for.
Yeah, and he does, whether he got the advice to do that and chose not to, or whether he didn't get the advice and still chose not to, I think he made a mistake with regards to how people will perceive him now. Well, is this now just something in this point in time in history? Will 3 years from now, will this matter? Will it matter 5 years from now? We don't know that.
See, if I had told you Steve Simmons, and we'll move on from Gretzky, but I'm all riled up here. But if I told you just merely, let's say 2 years ago, if I'd said to you, hey, there'll be a day in a couple of years when Wayne Gretzky comes to Canada and gets soundly booed. Like if I said that to you, you would say, Mike, you're nuts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's obvious. But listen, there's been no time, I'm coming up to my 70th year. There's been no time in my lifetime where our country has been under siege.
Right.
This is the first time.
Right.
So this is something none of us have ever lived through before. None of us have ever witnessed before or seen before.
Right.
So we don't know what to think. And we don't know how to react other than we're willing to protect what's ours. And we're willing to protect what we've fought so hard to build. And
we're taking notes of the Kevin O'Learys and the Wayne Gretzkys. We're taking notes. Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? It still strikes me impossible that we're living through this and that it's actually happening. And that, I can't believe, the last years of our former prime minister and what happened in this country and what's happened in the country in a variety of ways. But I was really hoping that the new prime minister would be somebody I would be happy for or be excited about. And I'm finding now that I'm having less, what's the word I'm looking for? But less belief in him, and he's only a few months into the job.
So where does that stem from? I'm naturally curious, and I think we should disclose the obvious, which not everybody realizes. But the newspaper that you've written for forever is absolutely slanted in favor of the Conservative Party of Canada. Like I don't even think this is even a debating point. And that's not to say you share those regular. I've had Liz Braun on the program, and she's, bleeding heart lefty, okay? And she wrote for 100 years for your paper, so it doesn't mean it applies across the board. But one of the more conservative sports writers I've ever met is the aforementioned honorary mayor of Etobicoke, Steve Buffery, right? So I'm just curious, what specifically has you so unhappy with Mark Carney's performance as prime minister?
I don't trust him. I don't believe what comes out of his mouth. I don't like of how he says one thing in an election and then does something else after the fact. And so I was looking for strength. And I'm not political. I'm not, I work for the very conservative Toronto Sun.
Right.
My opinions are, I would call myself a centrist. In some positions I'm right wing, in some positions I'm left wing. I'm kind of like one of these guys who can play all three forward positions. But I don't get a sense right now that I believe what he's saying or what he's doing, and I don't trust him. And there's things happening in this country right now, and they're not related to Trump, and they're not related to, what do you call it? This whole taking over of the 51st state and all that. But the level of hatred in this country right now across the board we just saw something in Toronto happen yesterday. We've seen things in Vancouver recently. Like you hardly go a day now without some kind of hate involved crime. And I want to know, in this place that used to be this place I was so proud of, where did this hatred come from? And why is it so prevalent now? And I don't understand it, but I sure don't like it. And I really don't like, and I hated it in the Trudeau time, is he never stood up against anything. He stood for nothing. And if you stand for nothing, this is what you get in terms of solution.
I got to ask you a question because I was having a chat with my friend and client, Avi Fettergreen, the other day, and we were talking about this and that, and I was just made an offside reference that everybody loves Avi Fettergreen was pretty much the sentence I said, because I find him to be a very likable, talented filmmaker. And he told me, I was spit upon. And then I had to inquire, like, what are you talking about? You were spit upon. And he started to tell me the story that since October 7th, he has experienced a level of anti-Semitism in Toronto, the likes of which he had never experienced prior. And he said that he was literally spit upon. I don't know if he was coming out of the temple. I'm not sure. But I was curious, is that what you're referencing when you talk about the hate-involved crime? Is it what has been experienced by some Jewish people in the city since October 7th?
Well, it's not just Jewish people. I think we saw what just happened in Oshawa. Was it a day ago? That wasn't Jewish people. It's a different religion. It's a different culture. We saw what happened in London, Ontario, when the guy with the car drove over a whole family.
Right.
Like
they were Muslim.
This isn't the Canada I know. And so when I live in a neighborhood that's, I'm not going to say fully Jewish, but it's predominantly Jewish. And there's a strip mall not far from where I live, and there's two stores and a restaurant side by side in a strip mall. All three were vandalized with Jewish anti-Semitic symbols recently. And I thought to myself, what do the people who live in my neighborhood have to do with what's going on in Israel?
Right.
What do they have to do with what's going on in Gaza or what's going on in the Middle East or policy? I don't remember getting the phone call from Netanyahu asking me what I thought he should do. I might have an opinion, but the opinion is somewhat meaningless. It's my opinion. That's all it is. But why is it that in our, and it's not just our country now, it's happening, unfortunately, it's happening all over. You're seeing it in the United States on college campuses more than anywhere else. You're seeing it in the UK. You're seeing it in France. It's where all of this hatred has come around the world in recent years. It's hard to figure. And we took a certain value being Canadians. I think we took things like safety for granted. I think we took, not being spit on for granted.
Freedom of religion.
Yes. And so when this now happens, it's like, where am I and what's going on and who's protecting me here? And that's my complaint with basically all levels of government. And to be honest, the mayor of Toronto is the top of my I can't stand her list.
Olivia Chow. Now,
and I don't live in Toronto, so I'm happy for that.
Okay, now this conflation, this despicable, wrong conflation of basically somehow if you're angry at Israeli policies and what's happening from the Israeli government, and then you apply this to people of the Jewish faith. I mean, it's a faulty premise and totally erroneous and unfair and wrong, and it makes me sick. But it applies kind of both ways in the sense that I have absolutely had somebody on the program be sympathetic to civilians in Gaza and was told that opinion was anti-Semitic. So like this I'm saying this conflation is wrong both ways. Israel and I have this chat with Ralph Benmergui all the time, my friend and client. But the fact that you can absolutely be a proud Jewish person and be against the policies of Netanyahu and not agree with what Israel is doing in response to October 7th. These are two separate.
Yeah,
things.
but people don't view it that way.
Right, no,
It's
that's
not,
right.
It's
So
not
people
viewed that way.
Right.
And so therefore, if I am a Jew living in Thornhill, Ontario,
Yeah.
I am clearly the person who was to blame for the hospital being
Right.
bombed or whatever place
Yeah.
was being bombed that day, while they're searching out Hamas leaders. You know, there's too many elements for a sports writer to be really making sense of any of this, other than the fact that
No, it's disgusting.
Well, here's the thing. I'm married to one of the great people of all time. She's now put up with 40 years of me. You know, she should
get the Order of Canada.
She should be getting Donovan Bailey's gold medal. Is what she should be getting.
Both of them.
And you think about it, but she is so angry about not feeling safe for the first time in her life. She's a Cape Bretoner where they don't lock their doors.
Right.
You know, she grew up in that kind of environment and now is looking around and seeing, you know, what's happening to this city or to other cities or to the rest of this country. And it's pretty alarming. I mean, it's pretty alarming when they had I think it was a graduation at MIT recently where, you know, they had Palestinian protesters. What do they have to do with graduation at MIT? Like, this is the struggle that we have now is we don't know who the people are that are hating. We don't know who the people are that are protesting. We don't know if they're being paid to do so. We don't know. Like, there's a lot of unanswered questions here.
Jeez Louise. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I had this pretty open and honest chat with Mike Wilner on this exact topic pretty recently. And I feel sick that you're going through this. And nobody should be persecuted because of their religion. That's just wrong. So, oh my goodness. Okay. I'm going to ask you about a big name that's been in the news, and I know you're going to have many words to say about it. But just before I do that, I want to welcome a brand new sponsor to this show. It's the Waterfront BIA. And I'm going to specifically shout out an event that's happening tonight and through this weekend. So we're recording on July 4th. This will publish the afternoon of July 4th. So if you're hearing this, July 4, 5, and 6, there is a festival called Fun Philippines Toronto Food and Music Festival. And you can experience the vibrant heart of the Philippines and enjoy live performances by Filipino artists, feast on authentic Filipino foods, discover artisanal and indigenous made craft exhibits. This is the perfect opportunity, Steve, to explore new flavors or embrace traditions happening at the waterfront this weekend. So make a plan. Check out all the great Filipino action there. And last but not least, I know you're a fan. I think you're a fan. Have we ever talked about Toronto Maple Leafs baseball, Steve?
I don't know if we have.
Okay. What are your experiences with Toronto Maple Leafs baseball?
Well, it's funny. We're just talking about hate and riots and all of that. My dad would tell me about the Christie Pitts riots from 75 or 78 years ago, how many years ago it was now. And I believe he was there. And he would talk about the Toronto that he knew that was very prejudiced at that time and then grew into the city that it grew into. And so for us to now, my dad's 26 years gone, for me in my head, I hear his voice and I'm thinking about the times that we sat on the hill, watching ball games at Christie Pitts because, where else could you go and sit on a Sunday afternoon for nothing?
Right.
And enjoy baseball. That was a great place to take kids. No cost and nice day and stay as long as as you want, and the quality of baseball is reasonably good. So that's kind of I haven't spent a lot of time there. I used to see Jack Dominico all the time back in the days when the Sun had a newsroom and he was still alive, and he'd pop around. And a lot of our guys were doing program pieces for him for his program.
Right.
When he was publishing, and he did a lot of work with the Sun and selling advertising for the Sun, and so we saw a lot of Jack over the years. He was an interesting character.
So I'm going to give you, Steve, this book, which is the history of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball, and I'll encourage you to revisit a game at Christie Pitts. Fill the hill. You can now, without being harassed by the cops, you can now drink a beer sitting and watching a Maple Leafs game. So grab a lager, a hot dog, and enjoy some Maple Leafs action, coached by World Series champion Rob Butler.
I did a story, I think it was about 5 years ago. They had the anniversary of the Christie Pitts riots, and they had a softball game at Christie Pitts' commemoration. They had a bunch of Toronto dignitaries out for that.
Right.
But I found a guy named Joe Black who lived in the above the convenience store right at Bloor and is it Christie?
It's Christie.
The crossroads? Yeah. Right at Bloor and Christie. And he watched the entire riot happen. He was not old enough, I guess, to be out there and playing it. And he gave me a play-by-play of everything he saw that day.
Wow.
And it was pretty amazing to hear it from, I think Joe has since passed, but it was an incredible thing to hear from someone who was witness to that kind of history. And at the time, there was signs on beaches in Toronto where it would say no Jews or dogs allowed.
Oh my God! Wow. Okay. Well, there's better things happening at Christie Pitts now, Steve. So there's a woman from Japan named Ayami Sato.
Yeah, that's a great story. I think it's a phenomenal. It's a story we haven't done enough on. I think just because we're so focused on Leafs, Raptors,
the other Leafs,
yeah.
So, and we're going to do some focus on that, except it is a great story, and I think the whole vibe. Cito Gaston was there last week. Do you know Snow, the man who sang Informer?
Yes, you had that album.
He's the 12 Inches of Snow. So he's the official ambassador for Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. Snow.
You know what? I have not been around there. I've been threatening to. I think when I have a grandson now. And when he gets a bit older, I'm going to take him to Christie Pitts.
Let me know. We'll give you the star treatment when Steve Simmons makes it. You know who's there every game is Larry Milson. He lives right there. He's at every game. I see him there. Okay, so we're going to hit some hot spots here. Always amazing to talk to you. Please, a few words or more, if you will, about Masai Ujiri. Why was he fired?
Money. Edward Rogers did not like what he was being paid and did not like having to pay that much money for someone to do what Masai did for the Raptors. And now there's a second factor in that money. Masai had a clause in his contract, and it was a percentage based on value of the franchise. And if you've been following pro sports in recent years, sports franchises have gone out of control in terms of value.
Yes.
So the amount of money they would have to pay Masai this coming year, for example, was astronomical. And when I asked somebody directly, why did Masai get fired? Because Keith Pelly did not really answer the question at the press conference. I was told because the percentage got too high. And whatever the money, whatever that equates to in dollars, because I wasn't given the breakdown of how it works, he was making a lot of money just in salary with 1 year to go on his deal. So you add that to that 2%, which is, I don't know exactly how the whole thing works out, but if you take a look at the 10 years that he's been with the Raptors, 12 years, and ask yourself, what was the franchise worth when he got here? What's it worth now? How much did he, play a part in the increasing of the value, or is that just what's happened in all of pro sports? But I was told that 2% was, it was not, in Masai's case, the 2% solution.
Money, money, money. Oh, my goodness. Okay, now I need to talk about a guy who's going to make a lot of money in Vegas this year. Mitch Marner. Let's chat about, there's two ways to look at this. Firstly, will Mitch get booed when he comes back? Like, will there be this sense that he was never going to sign here? And why is it you think Mitch never seemed to put it together in the playoffs when it mattered? Talk to me about Mitch Marner.
Mitch Marner is an interesting, and I'm not going to say complicated, because maybe uncomplicated might be the best way to put it. Incredible talent. I mean, I don't think anyone would ever say it. He could do everything. Yeah. Mitch is, exceptional skater, exceptional vision, exceptional passer, exceptional playmaker, creative player, all those things. But when hockey got harder, and, hockey always uses the term time and space. You take time and space away, what can you do? When you took time and space away from Mitch Marner, he became less effective. So I'll use power play as an example. Very, very, very interesting power play guy because of all of the talents that he brings on the power play. And the Leafs, in the 9 years that he was here, had the 4th best power play in the NHL. In playoffs, in the 9 years he was in the playoffs, I believe they have the 20th best power play. So what happened with the same guys on the ice for those 2 minutes or however times you're a game you're talking about?
Right.
What happened to that at playoff time that they weren't able to translate, at the same or even close to the same percentages? Now, Mitch Marner's excellent penalty killer, correct? That's one of the things that Craig Berube and previous coaches used him to do. So he was used to kill penalties. In the playoffs, the Leafs, I think in the 9 years he was with the Leafs, were 10th in penalty killing. In playoffs, they were 25th. So again, what were they not able to do with the same people in the extended time? It wasn't just that they couldn't win games and they couldn't score goals. Their strengths, this was a team built on skill, which means they were built for power play and they were built for penalty kill. And they were in 9 years, 20th on the power play, 25th on the penalty kill. Those are bad numbers. Those are numbers.
Those numbers are hard to believe because every season 16 teams make the playoffs. So to get a number like that, because obviously some new teams come and go, whatever, but that's difficult to get in the 20s.
Well, I guess if you wanted to do it, break it down even more accurately, you would eliminate the teams that had maybe 1 or 2 playoff series, and you'd have to do it that way.
You got the Sabres who had 0.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that whatever it was that they did in the season, they have been unable to do. And if you look at the 9 clinching games that the Leafs lost in each of each season, they were eliminated in the last game of every season. So it's 9 years of being eliminated, 7 times in the first round.
Right.
Mitch Marner did not score in one of those games. So he did not produce when it was on the line, but neither, in fairness, did Austin Matthews, neither did other people. I think William Nylander of the group of 4 is the only one that sort of produced at a reasonable level. John Tavares also for 7 of those years, didn't produce all that much either.
Right.
But in Mitch's case, I think him leaving has very little to do with what the Leafs did or didn't do in the playoffs, and a lot to do with how everything was perceived or how he perceived everything to be. He did not like that he believes he was singled out, much more so than Matthews, much more so than Tavares, much more so than Nylander, for problems the Leafs had over the years.
Like a whipping boy.
He believes that. One of the reasons he believes that is because everybody around him tells him that. And Mitch listens to his father, and he listens to his agent, and he listens to his friends. And there's a lot of there was a lot of jealousy, even though he'll come on camera and say, Austin Matthews is my best friend. He'll come on camera and say that. Behind closed doors, he's not saying that. And behind closed doors, you're not seeing Austin Matthews and Mitch hanging out a whole lot. What you're seeing is, I'll give you an example. One game, the Marner crew invited, 10 or 12 people to come to a Leaf game. And what you see after the games is they all sort of huddle together in a different part of the arena, once the game's over. And so the group is all there huddled together, and they're there on Marner tickets, and some of them are wearing Matthews jerseys. And apparently Daddy went ballistic over the fact that, we're giving them tickets and they're wearing his jersey. Other guy.
Right.
And so that kind of thing, how come he got to be captain and I didn't get to become captain? How come he got the first contract long term and I did? Like, how come he got the bonuses when he was drafted and I didn't get the bonuses that the Leafs said they weren't going to give anyone? They gave them to Austin. And so there was that kind of built up over time and over the years. And the funny thing, the last 2 years, He had 53 assists on Austin Matthews' goals. If anything, he should be, they should be, huzzahing to each other, because one guy's a playmaker and one guy's a goal scorer, and what a nice fit they should be together.
Right.
But, I think what happened is over time, he just didn't fit here anymore. And so he basically he had his best season individually this year while plotting to leave. It's kind of a
that's
unique
the thing, though. It's apparent that he's known for quite some time. He was out of here.
Well, he was asking, like, Max Pacioretty, what was it like to live in Vegas? If you're doing that, you're not so subtle. And one thing about Mitch is he didn't know how to come across well when speaking to the public. And by speaking to the public, I mean post-game interviews and his time at the podium and that kind of thing. He didn't come across particularly well, and he was never told or never coached properly on how to sort of do it. And he plays his last game. They lose the playoff game to Florida.
Yeah. And
one of the questions asked is did you think that this is your last game? Did you think this is your last game in the uniform and last game? And he said, I've never thought about it. Well, at that moment, of course, you have no choice but to believe it because he said it, right?
Right.
But you realize a month or two later,
he knew, of course.
He's lying his rear end off. And so, one thing about Mitch is he didn't know how to play the game outside the game, if you understand what I'm saying. And there is a certain, to play hockey in Toronto, there's a certain way you have to be. And he wasn't that way. And because of that, he became less popular than his teammates. And I think when he does come back, and I think
this is why
it's
how
wrong.
will he be received? When he comes back?
He's going to be massively booed. And I'm not sure it's what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not sure it's necessary or even warranted, because he played 9 years here.
Yeah.
He played exceptionally well for 9 regular seasons.
Yes.
The team didn't have any success. He was one of the players on that team that didn't have any success. So him leaving in the end, it wasn't as a free agent because he was traded, but it was essentially leaving as a free agent. Is he earned the right to be a free agent by fulfilling his contract to the end. And he earned the right to be a free agent by choosing not to negotiate with the Leafs. And when they went to him in March or wherever it was and said, we have a deal that we can trade you to Carolina. Would you like to go? He said no. And people are going to look at that forever and say, oh, you could have Mikko Rantanen.
Although Matt Sundin did the same thing, right?
Yeah, a different kind of way, because It was right at the end of Matt Sundin's career. And I think he only played like 1 year.
Yeah, but the fact that, he did sign in Vancouver.
He was traded to Montreal for a first-round pick, or could have been traded to Montreal for a first-round pick, and then he refused.
Yeah,
and
that always irked me, because then he up and went to Vancouver.
And I've had that conversation with him. I thought he should have gone to Montreal,
right?
At the time, but guys do what they do for whatever reason, and for whatever reason, Marner did not want to negotiate with the Leafs this year. Now, whether that was his agent saying that, whether that was his dad saying that, whether that was whoever made the call, they made the call. And what did he do? He wound up where he wanted to be. He played.
You called it too. I'll give you some props.
On January 10th, not January, June 10th.
Right.
I wrote a column saying that Marner's going to Vegas and Alex Pietrangelo will be placed on LTIR. And here we are, it's July 4th, and what's happened? Marner's in Vegas, and Alex Pietrangelo's career is over.
There you go. Great career, though. Now, it's interesting that Marner seemed to wilt when the pressure was at its highest, in all these elimination games that we inevitably lost over the last decade or so, because in the Four Nations Cup, where it felt like it was bigger than a hockey game, I know sitting here in South Etobicoke, it felt like much more than a hockey game, and I can't tell you how badly I wanted to win that game against the USA. He had that sublime assist in overtime, Connor McDavid scoring the winner. Like, he seemed to rise to the occasion when there was all eyes on him.
Well, here's the funny thing. You go back to Game 6, Leafs and Florida, he makes the brilliant assist, to Matthews for,
right.
Beautiful goal. So he has those moments in him. But if you go look at is it 4 games they played in the
Yeah, there's
in the Four Nations?
yes, there was 4 games. yeah.
Okay. He played a lot in game 1, not very much in game 2. Was used sort of sparingly in 3, and then played like John Cooper had him figured out. I'm not going to play you 20 minutes or 19 minutes every game.
Right.
I'm going to play you when I need you in certain circumstances. And in some games, he scored that. Was it the overtime breakaway goal against Sweden?
Right. Yes.
You know, he scored that. He did nothing in that game, but scored that goal.
Right.
He didn't do much in the clinching game, in the gold medal game, but he set up McDavid for the winning goal. So, which is what Mitch Marner is. He has phenomenal skill.
Oh no, no doubt about it.
And here's the guy came to the NHL. Think about this: from you could go to almost any team in the league and not play 9 years with either Austin Matthews or John Tavares as your centers. These are the only centers he's ever played with.
Right.
This is incredible talent to play with. Now he gets to go to Vegas and he can play with Jack Eichel. And if things go bad there, Tomas Hertl. So it's like he's born under the right star. Like you can get drafted in, I don't know, Columbus or someplace, sure. Buffalo, and never play with anybody. And so he should be thanking whatever for his 9 years in Toronto, which were very good, except for the fact that the team, and I don't think the team, frankly, was good enough in almost any of the other years to be a Stanley Cup contender, but I thought they were this year.
Yeah, they had me fooled as well. Now, I want to ask you about the gentleman who was your special guest when the reporters were live at the Paradise while somebody was stealing the lights off of my bike outside. I'm still mad about it. But Brendan Shanahan, the Shana plan has come to an end, the end of an era there.
Brendan Shanahan did some incredible things with the Maple Leafs. They're not all evident in standings. They're not all evident in playoff success and or failures. What he did with the franchise in building it up, in building all around it, in dealing with the alumni and retiring numbers, and just turning the Leafs into a going concern as a franchise. Because the Leafs had gone through they had gone through the John Ferguson Jr. years. They had gone through they're an embarrassment years.
The Jeff Finger era.
Yeah. And so you get to all that. Shanahan took over a team that was disastrous and had zero talent. I remember one of the first things he did is he ordered a breakdown of every player in the organization and sort of, how much talent do we actually have here? And after going through the whole thing, what he realized is we don't have much. And so, they went through the first season, which was a write-off, and then a tank season, which got them Austin Matthews, and
right.
And they kind of went from there, and he built. You look at the Buffalo Sabres just down the road. 14 years in a row, they weren't in the playoffs. Leafs were in the playoffs all 9 of Shanahan's seasons.
Yeah.
In some places, they would congratulate you for that, but what happened is that the expectations, got high, and the other problem the Leafs ran into, and this is something that they can't undo. They signed 4 players for $40-some million in cap money prior to a pandemic,
right? Not
knowing there was coming a pandemic.
Flattens it.
And so for the next 4 years, the salary cap didn't move. And so those salaries, which should have been increasing each year as the cap increased each year, should have been less and less a percentage of the overall, became an absolute stranglehold. And, you can criticize Kyle Dubas for many, many things, but I don't think you can blame him, for what happened out of China.
I'll find a way.
All around the world, because, they had no money. They had no money to spend, and they still are paying in some ways for that. And not only did they have no money, but they didn't sign very good contracts when they did. Everybody in the world got a no movement clause, and everybody got too much money, and everybody got too many years for the most part, other than Matthews. And so, the Leafs were strangled by that, and that was part of the Shanahan time. Although I thought he made a mistake, frankly, and him and I have had this conversation. When he had Lou Lamoriello here as general manager, and he had Mark Hunter and Kyle Dubas as his assistants, that's a strong hockey front office. That's a very strong hockey front office. There's a guy who's done it all with two guys, one in particular who's learning and one who's, been putting together great junior, operations for years and years and years. And so he had all that in place. He decided in order to keep Dubas that he would have to let Lou go. Then in order to keep Dubas, he would also, him and Hunter wouldn't work together. So Hunter left. And so to promote Dubas, who probably wasn't ready to be promoted, he lost a Hall of Fame general manager and, probably a Hall of Fame junior level executive. And so the Leafs didn't recover very well from that. I think that was Shanahan's biggest mistake. People will look at other things over the years and give you other reasons. But to me, those were the biggest errors that they made. And then once, it was interesting, he fired Dubas over what I believe was a bit of a power struggle of sorts. And hired Brad Treliving, who was sort of only guy available kind of thing that I can put in there. And I didn't like the move, frankly, when they did it. But as I've gotten to know Brad Treliving and gotten to know how he operates and how he works and what he does, I'm more and more and more impressed with him than I ever was before he came to the Leafs. And I think under the circumstances, which have been really difficult, because he has been trapped by all the money problems that happened before he got here, he wound up finding Anthony Stolarz for cheap, and he wound up bringing in Chris Tanev for cheap, and he wound up, there's a lot of good moves that he made, small moves, some of them, but all of them that made the team better. And I thought, again, last year, I thought the team with Marner was ready to, and they were ready. They were up 3-1 in Game 3 against Florida, eventual Stanley Cup champions. So they were ready to a point. Whether they would have gone and beaten anybody after that, I don't know. They didn't get to where they needed to get to. And unfortunately, one thing we'll never know, what if Stolarz was healthy for the whole playoffs? What if Sam Bennett hadn't, essentially injured him? Yeah. Would the Leafs have advanced? That we don't know, and that we'll never know. But
what we do know is the Oilers didn't get to a Game 7.
No, and you know what? If you look, one of the things about this Florida Panthers team, I don't know if we talk nearly enough about how great they are. They had 11 one-sided wins in the playoffs. That's 5-1, 6-1 kind of games. 11 of them. I went through the history. The great Edmonton Oilers teams with Wayne Gretzky and Messier didn't do that. Right. The great New York Islander teams that won 19 playoff series in a row did not do that. You can go through teams in history. Most teams, this has barely been done. So what the Florida Panthers did this year, now that could partially be maybe Carolina's not that good, and maybe Tampa Bay's not that good, and I don't,
maybe the Leafs aren't that good.
Yeah, who knows? But what I'm saying is, but when they had to win, what had happened? 5-1, 6-1.
Oh, I know. I remember a couple of 6-1s. Yeah,
it was like tennis.
That's right. All right, now I just checked the clock. Steve Simmons, so easy to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to try to keep this thing to 2 hours. So we're going to go a little rapid because it's been a while since you've been here. And my next episode, which is Monday, happens to feature Stephen Brunt. So Stephen Brunt will be on the show, and we'll be joined by Blake Bell and Len Lumbers, who are the two chaps behind This Day in Dave Stieb History. Do you follow this account on social media?
I do not.
Okay, you're missing out, my friend. By the way, what is your social media of choice? Like, where do you post anywhere specific these days?
I have really attempted to avoid all of it. I post my columns on X. Occasionally, I drop them into my Facebook account because you can't post them. That's about the only social. But I really choose to not engage at all, just based on history and
for your mental health. Too many hot dog jokes, right?
It's gotten vile over the years with just how people perceive things and how angry people are.
Well, even when I promoted you coming on, I got several, ask him if Mitch Marner likes hot dogs. That's the kind of typical Simmons question.
I've written more than 9,000 columns.
Yeah.
I've actually never done a column on hot dogs. It's one sentence
One lead.
in a column. And if you actually read the piece, it's probably the best piece on why Phil Kessel was leaving the Maple Leafs at
No,
the
but
time.
as I recall, you got the location wrong.
Yes, I know that. And that's a whole...
So that was like fuel for the fire.
But here's the thing. If you don't like 100 of my pieces, if you have found fault, if you have found error, if you have found the opinions not right, however 1,000 of them, what percentage of my work is that? Not 1,000. Say it's 100. What's 100 to 9,000? My math is terrible.
Oh, it's 9. That's an easy one of all those zeros. But yes, point taken.
Yes.
So I don't have to think on it.
So you ask people what is their objection to me?
Right.
It's the same for, he said this about him or he said that about. It's the same 5 columns.
Right.
It's never beyond that. And every time I get into a conversation with one of the haters, by the time we end the conversation, they're not haters anymore.
Well, you heard the Jeff Simmons episode of Toronto Mike, and we did talk about this, and we agreed, Steve, that you should lean in on this. Like, I know, lean in on the fact that you're the hot dog guy. I know Phil Kessel posted that picture of him on a golf course about the hot dogs.
By the way, he never denied
right
any of that.
Right.
I always found that interesting. And then he
who doesn't love a good hot dog?
He kind of went to school. I probably told you this in a previous one because the hot dog story was fed to me by one of my kids, and it was from one of their friends who lived in a condo.
Right.
And what we were planning to do at the time at the Sun was we were going to get a photo out to shoot him outside of his condo eating a hot dog.
Sure.
Which at the end of the day, of course, never came to be. Newspapers get busy, things happen. People get shot.
Sure.
And so it never happened. I never thought of it again until the day I happened to mention it and get it wrong in the column. And here we are, on my gravestone, they're going to say something about hot dogs.
But you'll be remembered. I feel that's why I think Jeff and I were talking about you leaning in because, yeah, it's all stupid and it's not fair. But the fact that you're remembered for something like that, you can spin that to be kind of like to become like a wrestling heel, right? You could be.
Yeah, but you know what? If you love the business as much as I do,
right,
and you love the work as much as I do, and you've put your heart and soul into it as much as I have for the last 45 years, and you care about everything that you say and you write, and you realize how much harder sometimes you work than other people doing the same job, that you want to be regarded for that. You want to be known for that. You want to be respected for the work that you've done and for the award. I mean, my office is like, I hate to say this because it sounds like it's bragging, but my office is like I'm surrounded by awards, and it's like, I'd love to throw them all out and along with the hot dog jokes.
Story. Do you think this is a bit like when Dave Hodge, the first time I met the man, when he was at the door,
the pen?
Yeah. So just before we start recording, I was, I'm with Dave Hodge, and it's a young broadcaster, Mike, and it's like, oh my God, of course I have a million questions about the pen flip. He says to me, I'd prefer we didn't talk about the pen flip. And I looked Dave Hodge in the eyes and I said something to the effect of, well, Dave, I'm going to ask you about the pen flip. What you say is up to you. If you want to say I don't want to talk about the pen flip, I'm not going to rough you up. And I ended up asking him about the pen flip, and he gave great answers, actually. But I remember that was his words to me before we pressed record. And it's funny because I think Dave Hodge, similar to you, he doesn't want to be known as the pen flip guy because of all the great work he's done over the decades. I
took a lot of grief years ago for writing something about Matt Sundin and a hip injury. And at the time, I forget whose career ended. Might have been Mogilny's career ended on a similar hip injury. And so I'd written about he had suffered this torn labrum of the hip, and it was going to require surgery and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turned out, and I didn't know this, not being a medical person, that there are 2 different torn labrums of the hip.
Right.
One is extreme and one is less extreme. And the one Sundin had played with in the season prior to that, and I think the next season as well, was the less extreme that eventually wound up having surgery on and kind of ruined the last few years of his career. But I took great grief for being wrong what people perceive to be wrong, it wasn't that I said his career was over, is I said that this player's career ended on that injury.
Right.
Which again, but again, it's one of those things that takes on a life of its own that you can't get back, and that's part of the things I don't like about social media is you can't put things back in the bottle when the genie's out.
Well, I went over to the live stream just to check in on what's going on there, and Mark Weisblood does. I'm just going to read what he wrote. He just said he's Lawsoning. Lawsoning is a term we use on the program when people fact check people, and that's a shout out to Robert Lawson who fact checked Randy Bachman on Toronto Mike. But he's Lawsoning the "No Jews or Dogs" sign in Toronto. He says they never found any evidence of this, so that possibly that there were no Jews or dog signs in Toronto back in the 30s. But I wasn't there.
I'm quoting my father.
Yeah, you're right. I wasn't there. That was 1933, a little early for me and the Snowman to be in that riot. Okay, so I mentioned Stephen Brunt, Blake Bell, Len Lumbers. I have a question for you, Steve Simmons. Does Dave Stieb belong in Cooperstown?
Yes. And I think what happens is you have to look at Dave Stieb's career now through the lens of what we statistically accept and appreciate now more than we did then. And he did not win a Cy Young, I believe. And I don't think he even came close to winning a Cy Young.
No.
If you look at the votes he got most years, he was a fair bit back. But if you look at Jack Morris's statistics, 10-year period, and you look at Dave Stieb's statistics, and I'm doing this all off the top of my head, I don't have the things sitting in front of me. If you look at Dave Stieb's statistics over a 10-year period, I think Dave Stieb's statistics are more impressive than Jack Morris's, other than Jack Morris's what he was able to do in big games and things like that. I thought Jack Morris I voted for Jack Morris a number of times as a Hall of Famer, and I never had the opportunity to vote for Steve because he was off the ballot, before it got to that point. And I feel the same way, by the way, about Carlos Delgado.
I have two more names, and next was Carlos Delgado.
I feel that way about Carlos Delgado got caught coming onto the Hall of Fame ballot in the wrong year. And you're only allowed to vote for 10. And so if you go through it, I think the year that he was up, there were 10 better candidates. And so he got bypassed quite early. And I'll bet you most of those 10 wound up getting elected. I don't know if Bonds was one of them or whether Clemens was one of them, but other than them.
Sure.
But you look at his numbers, and I'll use an example. Fred McGriff, who's now in the Hall of Fame, he got in on the secondary, extension. The what do they call it? The Seniors Committee or
right.
The New Era Committee. He got in that way, and I think for Carlos to have a chance, I think that will be how Carlos will get in. And the problem with all the guys now who are lining up to for passed over, and each city will look. Some people look at Don Mattingly, for example, as being one of those guys. If you look at who doesn't get in, and I'm a Luis Tiant fan for years gone by, and thought Luis Tiant should be there. But baseball's the one Hall of Fame compared to all the other sports where there's always people on the outside who you think should be in, more than the others. Like to me in hockey, there's too many guys in,
right?
And basketball, everybody and his mother gets in,
right? T-Mac's in there,
but T-Mac probably should be in there, but a lot of really good baseball players are not and will not get to the Hall of Fame.
So I feel like they got it right with Tim Raines eventually, and then maybe the same can happen for Dave Stieb. And I'm just going to promote Monday's episode with Stephen Brunt, Blake Bell, and Len Lumbers. They're going to make the case. We're going to make the case for Dave Stieb being in the baseball's Hall of Fame.
Somebody, and I don't know who this was, somebody emailed me a story I had written on Dave Stieb from the early 80s that I didn't have any recollection of ever doing. I was working for the Calgary Herald at the time, and I had come to Toronto for something, and I'd gone to a couple of Blue Jays games, and I did a Steve piece. And I had no recollection. Sometimes you write something all these years later.
Sure.
It's
a long time
you
ago.
don't remember them all. And I was so happy that whoever sent it to me, I was so happy that they sent it, and I got a chance to read a piece I didn't even know existed.
Oh, that's amazing. Last name quickly here. We'll do this one quick. Cito Gaston.
No. I think to get in as a manager, you have to be exceptional. And so, the Dusty Bakers of the world or the Bruce Bochy's of the world will get in. But Cito only managed it in one city. He only managed in one place. He won the 2 World Series. If you go beyond that, there's not enough on the resume to me. I'm a Cito guy in many ways, but I just don't see how you make the candidacy for him.
Alan Gold has a question for you. He says, how do you come up with the names of the people for the end of your Sunday columns when you do whatever happened to so-and-so?
It's really hard. And it's gotten way harder over the years because after 30 some years of writing the Sunday Notes column, 30 years times 45 columns a year times how many names have I used? And so what I tend to try and do is tie it into whatever's happening at the time in sports. So if Wimbledon is going on, I might use a tennis player. If a big golf tournament's going on, I might use a golfer. If hockey playoffs are going on, I might use a hockey guy. And I can always use Leafs and Blue Jays. Those are sort of my fall-on positions. And I tend to time it to someone who hasn't played in at least 10 years. And one of the things is I'm fortunate that I can search a name to see whether I'd used them already. Because sometimes you don't remember whether you have or you haven't. Right. And you go through it. One of the fascinating things to me is people love that one line. I'm writing 2,000 words on Sunday mornings and that one line, and I'll be getting my hair cut and someone will yell, Fred Boymastruck, or some ex-Leaf that no one can remember, or, some guy's name, Jason Blake. You'll just get a name thrown at you, some Blue Jay, some Argo quarterback, some anybody. And people are interested in that whatever became of. And some people have asked over the years, why don't you tell me next week where he is? And I tried at one time to do that. And what happened was it was too hard to find everyone.
Right.
If I could do it 100% and be accurate, then I'd love to do it. But as it works now, the Blue Jays had a really big week this week. So I might be thinking, I don't know who it is for Sunday, but I might be thinking tomorrow, who is it? And I'll just sort of call up rosters of certain seasons and see if I can find a name that's on there. And the beauty of having sports-minded children is, boy, they come up with way better whatever became of us than I do now.
Matt Layden, he's in Edmonton, big fan of the show. He just says, are you two going to talk about the retirements of both John Liu and Bob McKenzie? We did touch on Bob McKenzie, but I mean, if you had any words about John or Bob, and then the obvious question I'm going to ask you is, when you hear Bob talk about how he's going to be spending the next several years, you're similar vintage. Do you ever think, hey, I'd like to do that? Maybe it's time for me to retire.
The day I wake up and I'm not interested in what happened that day, or a point of view, or an angle I could write, or some way of producing what the next column might be. Like, I'll use the last 4 days of the Blue Jays, for example.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at home watching the games and I'm thinking, I should be there writing this, or I should be there writing. If my mind stops doing that, I'll be the first guy out. I'll be happy to walk away and not do it. But as long as I'm still enthusiastic and excited by it, I think I'll continue working. I don't know for how much longer. I've been really, really fortunate. I'm going to go back to, I guess, the early 80s now. I got to work with Bob McKenzie. I got to work for Bob McKenzie when he was the editor of the Hockey News. Right. I got to work with him while he was at TSN and I was at TSN. And what an honor it has been just to be around him, watch how he does his work, watch what a true professional he is. I think it was Jennifer Hedger who came up with the term that he's the Bob father. And I think it's a great term. If you look at the list of insiders, the Elliot Friedmans and the Pierre Lebruns and the Darren Dreggers and the Frank Saravellis and whoever else I'm missing, I apologize to. Bob McKenzie began all that. And he didn't just begin that. he began the draft being covered the way the draft is now covered. He started with the World Junior becoming a big deal. Like, so many things he was forerunner of in terms of his coverage. He's had a career that none of us will ever equal, and I'm just excited and happy to have worked around him. And when he was the editor of the Hockey News, I wrote a column called "The Western Word" out of Calgary for the Hockey News. And we were both about the same age. One quick funny story: we're in Long Island for the Stanley Cup Final in the mid '80s. So we're in a bar late at night, and they're re-showing the Islanders game. I believe it was against the Oilers, and they're re-showing it, and we're maybe having one or two too many drinks. And all of a sudden, it's intermission, and Stan Fischler is on, doing the intermission for the Islander game, and Bob McKenzie is his guest. And Bob is with us in the bar drinking, and we're yelling at the TV, "Hey, there's Bob McKenzie," and we're pointing, "He's right here." And all of a sudden, it was like he was the celebrity in the bar. Nobody knew who Bob McKenzie was or had ever heard of him at that moment, but he was the celebrity in the bar that night, and we were having a great, barrel of laughs with that moment. But again, what a career of influencing coverage of so many things. And one other thing, he never went to print and or broadcast with a story that wasn't true. That's an incredible, incredible thing to accomplish for 40 some years.
And we know he's a sweetheart because, like yourself, Steve Simmons, he's had multiple appearances on Toronto Mike. McCown said no. Can you believe it? Come on. Let's get back to that. Okay. How are things at Post Media these days?
I wouldn't know because we don't have an office anymore. So because we don't have an office anymore, we don't really ever see anybody except, unless you go to, let's say, a Leaf game, you see the Leaf writers, or a baseball game, you see the baseball writers, and kind of do it that way. We're still flourishing in the business somehow. I don't know how newspapers are making it anymore, frankly.
But you're still, am I correct to say you are the most widely read sports columnist in the country?
That is correct. And here's the interesting thing right now is I don't think newspaper companies, and I'm not going to just single out Post Media, but I think newspaper companies care as much about the newspaper today as they do about online. And so what they can do with online is they can calculate exactly how many people are reading this piece. Not only that, and what's more important than how many people are reading is how long are they engaged in the piece. Now, I don't know if it's because my Sunday Notes column is over 2,000 words or it's because people really love that thing, but the Sunday column is the most read piece in Canada, and it's the most engaged piece. And for purposes of selling advertising or whatever, the engagement number is far more important than the person clicking on the piece. So if I click on your column and I'm off of it in 7 seconds, then I haven't read anything.
That's called a bounce.
Yeah, I don't know the terms. You know them better than I do. But
bounce rate.
In my case, I have the long engagement time. And I believe last I had heard, my engagement time was the largest in the entire country. And so if that's the case and that's true, every time I get one of those snarky, "Why don't you retire?" emails or texts,
sure,
or online notes, I always think of saying, "Stop reading me," and I will.
One of the benefits is you're not behind a paywall. There's a lot of people who won't even read this thing in the Globe or this thing in the Star or whatever because they're not willing to give their credit card number.
Yeah, what you have to do is figure out ways to get around that. And how do these?
Where there's a will, there's a way.
There is a way. There are ways, and you've got to be smart about it.
Well, speaking of smart, the other benefit for you in that engagement rate is the average Toronto Sun reader reads very slowly. So you have that going for you.
I love that.
By the way, here's the hot-hitting question on our way out. Is it time to retire the Sunshine Girl?
it was time to retire the Sunshine Girl long ago.
Because they're just
You know the ones- these
they're
are all-
recycling old photos now.
Yeah,
Like
and
there's nothing new happening.
They're
since
not
the
even
COVID.
good old photos, by the way. They should have gotten rid of that thing years ago. There's no reason for it. But here's what's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Guess what's read online every single day?
The Sunshine Girl.
The Sunshine Girl gets enormous numbers of hits.
Well, that's shocking because, hey guys, I know where you
Really,
can see naked ladies now.
But you can see lots of things much more interesting than that.
I just remembered. So shout out to your cousin Stephen Page, because I just said naked ladies, and then I thought of bare naked ladies. That's a fun fact. But through a different part of the family tree, Snow is also related to Stephen Page.
He is.
Yeah. So Snow.
Must be on the other side.
It's a different branch. Okay, you know how these trees are. So through a different branch, Snow is related to Stephen Page, confirmed by Stephen Page. I saw him the other day at the Sloan garage sale. And you are, of course, related to the other side, and I think that's a fun fact. So you're not related to Snow, but you're related to a guy who's related to Snow.
But I used to have his album, so there's that.
12 inches of Steve Simmons. Dude, this was fantastic. Is there anything you wanted to say on the way out? I didn't mean to rush you, but we did a solid 2 hours, and I loved it. We're going to do it again.
Now I got to drive in rush hour traffic.
Well, I didn't even ask you about TFC said goodbye to the Italians. I was going to ask you if there's any hope for the Argos to become a big deal in this city again. I was going to talk about women's pro sports, the Scepters, the Tempo, AFC Toronto. But I feel like maybe we save, well, some of it's timely, but we saved some of that for next time. What do you say, Steve Simmons?
Sounds good to me.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,724th show. Go to TorontoMike.com for all your Toronto Mike needs. Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, Palma Pasta. Don't leave without your lasagna, Steve. Toronto's Waterfront BIA. Don't forget, the Fun Philippines Toronto Food and Music Festival is taking place this weekend by the waterfront in Toronto. Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. We're going to get Steve back to Christie Pitts. RecycleMyElectronics.ca, Building Toronto Skyline, and of course Ridley Funeral Home. See you all Monday when my special guests are Stephen Brunt, Len Lumbers, and Blake Bell. We're going to talk about Dave Steeb for however long it takes. See you then.